Hi everybody, foXnoMad here, and today I want to help you travel smarter by reviewing the iPad Air. Now, the Air has always been the choice for people who want a slim, light tablet to carry around, but this year the Air is carving out its space in Apple's lineup as the iPad to get for most people. Starting off with what the iPad Air is physically in this 2020 iteration. The screen's got a resolution of 2360 by 1640 at 264 ppi, a bit bigger than the 10.2 8th gen regular iPad and smaller than the 12.9-inch iPad Pro. The new iPad Air weighs 32 grams less than the 8th gen iPad and is 183 grams lighter than the iPad Pro. The iPad Air isn't the slimmest of the three, but just 0.2 of a millimeter thicker than the iPad Pro. And it's not just the size either. Inside you've got Apple's new A14 Bionic chip behind a liquid retina display. The Air is also compatible with Apple's 2nd gen pencil, unlike the regular iPad, meaning you can take advantage of the magnetic hold and wireless charging. The iPad Air also comes in two sizes, starting at 64 gigabytes or 256 gigabytes for those of you who need extra storage space. Now, for me personally, I don't store a lot of things on my iPad. It's sort of a mobile workstation for when I'm on the go, a reading device. I don't do a lot of heavy lifting work on the iPad, so I don't do video editing on the iPad or those kind of things. But for those of you who take a lot of notes with your iPad or use your iPad for work on a regular basis, more than just a stopgap between your phone and your laptop, then the 256 gigabyte option might make a lot of sense for you. And the iPad Air might make even more sense to you because it works with Apple's Smart Keyboard Folio as well, just like the iPad Pro. The iPad Air doesn't have Face ID like the iPad Pro, but it's got a fingerprint sensor in the power button now that works reliably and quickly. Honestly, I like having the option. Just make sure you register a couple of fingers since you're likely to orient your iPad differently depending on its use. Ditching the home button also gives you a little bit more screen real estate and smaller, even bezels around the edges. A more modern look, very reminiscent of the iPad Pro. Apple's also added dual speaker grills to the iPad Air, which sound pretty nice, a big improvement over the single grill design. Speaking of those edges, the iPad Air goes to the boxy design similar of the iPhone 12, which makes it easy to stand on its side if you need to. I don't recommend you doing that unless you've got something soft for your iPad to fall on. Rather, let me mention the Smart Folio. The Smart Folio is a case that's absurdly Apple priced, but so elegantly designed to work with the Air, it's harder to find a cheaper competitor nearly as good. It comes in 5 different colors and uses powerful magnets to snap the iPad Air into place. The grip is tight enough to let you do this. Even if I like having some extra reassurance and still holding on to the iPad and the case. Another nice thing about the case is it leaves the dual speakers on the top and bottom exposed, so you can listen to music or podcasts with the screen covered. The Smart Folio also leaves the edges in general exposed, so you can, show off that iPad color. Now, the iPad Air comes in 5 different colors, but like I mentioned in the unboxing, the colors are kind of flat, kind of pastel. They're not very bright, and depending on the angle of the lighting you're in, and what's in the background, this sky blue might not look quite as blue. So I'm looking at it now, and it looks blue at an angle, and I don't know if the camera's picking that up, but on certain angles, doesn't look quite as blue. So if you're looking for very vibrant and bright colors, you might just want to get a bright and vibrant case to put on top of your iPad rather than going with whatever colors Apple gives you, because those colors aren't too bright to start off with. Around the back on that pastel plane, the iPad Air sports a single 12 megapixel camera that doesn't have a flash or extra wide angle option like you have on the Pro. But chances are you're not going to be taking a lot of photos with your iPad. But if you do, the Air takes pretty good ones, and the video isn't bad either. There's no LiDAR like you have on the iPad Pro, and for most of you, that's not going to be a big deal unless you really want to take advantage of the AR capabilities of something like the iPad Pro. Still, the iPad Air is looking really, really good. The front-facing camera is 7 megapixels. It doesn't have the fancier portrait modes of the Pro, but it's a big jump up from the 1.2 megapixel camera in the regular iPad. Like the Pro, the iPad Air also has 1080p video capture, which I know for a lot of you is very important since a lot of you use your iPads for FaceTime and Skype calls and video calls in general. So having that enhanced front-facing camera is a really nice touch to the iPad Air, unlike the regular iPad, which is limited to a 720p camera, like the MacBook Pros, now that I think about it. But anyway, forget about that. The front-facing camera on the iPad Air is pretty good. And using this iPad is also, as you would expect with the A14 Bionic, very snappy and very fast. Apps open very quickly. Scrolling is pretty smooth, although I did notice the limit in 60 Hertz on this iPad Air. Now, for those of you who are already using Apple devices like your iPhone, you're not going to really notice that because those are all 60 Hertz devices. But if you're coming from something like an iPad Pro, which has 120 Hertz refresh rate, or some other high refresh rate screens, it's going to not look quite as snappy as the chip would suggest just because of that refresh rate. I wish Apple would have just made this 120 Hertz screen, but it's not a deal breaker or anything. It's just something that I noticed. And I know those of you coming from high refresh rate screens are probably going to notice it too. Battery life is also solid again, 10 hours on the spec sheet depending on your use and conditions, but it can certainly keep up over a long flight. And when you do need to charge, Apple lets you do that over USB-C now. USB-C. Come on, Apple, you can convert that iPhone. You know you want to. Anyway, it means less cables for you to carry, especially if you're wirelessly charging your iPhone regularly. Overall, I really like the 2020 iPad Air. Now, if you're using an iPad Air, an older model, and you're thinking about upgrading, this is a pretty easy choice. You're going to be really happy with this iPad Air. It's still as light and portable and a lot more powerful this time around. But for everybody else, this iPad Air might be something to look at because it's just creating such a big black hole within Apple's iPad lineup. This is really like the iPad Pro Lite. You can use the Smart Folio keyboard, you can use the second gen Apple Pencil, you can do some light video and photo editing on this thing, but that also means that the iPad Air has brought with it some of the iPad Pro's price. Now this 2020 iPad Air starts at a higher price than previous iPad Air models, but it's carved out a bigger space in Apple's iPad lineup. So if you've been looking for an iPad that you want to use more for work, you want to use it kind of as a second, maybe mobile, portable working station when you don't want to take out your full laptop, then this iPad Air can really do that. It's going to save you from spending more money on the iPad Pro. Before, your choices were more limited. You had the iPad Pro, and then the iPad Air, and then the regular iPad, which weren't really designed to be mobile workstations. They didn't work with things like the Smart Folio keyboard. They were slower. They didn't quite have the features from the iPad Pro, and you'd have to make that huge leap from, let's say, the iPad Air with its lower starting price up to the iPad Pro. But now you've got the iPad Air, which sits right in the middle of Apple's lineup. It takes people who might be looking at the 8th gen iPad and it kind of pulls them in. It takes people who have been looking at the iPad Pro and pulls them in. And now you've got this great iPad right in the middle of the lineup that makes the most sense for most people. Now, if you're trying to decide on which iPad to get, I think you pretty much know the choice between the Pro and the Air because I've talked about it so much. But let's talk about that 8th gen iPad quickly. So I'd say the 8th gen iPad is the iPad to get if you're on a budget, if you don't want to spend too much on a tablet, then you're going to save $270 from the next jump up, which is the iPad Air. And if storage space isn't a big issue for you, if you can get by with 32 gigabytes on your tablet or 128 gigabytes, which are the limits of what you can get on the 8th gen iPad, then you're probably going to be pretty happy with it. But considering these changes to the iPad Air and the iPad Pro, the 8th gen iPad looks less like a mobile workstation and more looks like a large portable video player. So if you use your iPad mostly for watching videos, if you use it to keep your kids entertained, if you use it for reading, but you don't do a lot of work on it, it's just sort of another mobile screen you can carry around the house, or maybe when you go to a cafe or something like that, then the 8th gen iPad Air makes more sense. But if you use your iPad for a lot of file editing, for example, so you need to download a bunch of files and edit them. If you use your iPad to take a lot of notes, or you want to use your iPad to take a lot of notes, if you want to draw using your iPad, if you want to do some light photo or video editing using your iPad, if you want to do any of those things, then the iPad Air makes so much more sense. If If you just need a larger video player that's portable that you can carry around with you, then the 8th Gen iPad is going to do everything you need it to do. But if you need something that can do more and is also slim and light and significantly future-proof, then the iPad Air might be the iPad for you. It's the iPad that's carving out this black hole in the middle of Apple's iPad lineup. It's sucking in people from the 8th Gen iPad, from the lower budget end iPads, and the higher end Pro iPads, and it's just kind of pulling in those people to try to get them into that iPad Air. It's the iPad, like I said, that makes the most sense for the most people. If you're an iPad Pro user, I think you know who you are. If you're a regular iPad user, then I think the choice is a lot more difficult for you at that end of the spectrum. But hopefully this video has laid out how to make that decision. Of course, if you have any questions, you can let me know down in the comments below. And if you've enjoyed this video, hit the like and subscribe buttons. I'll have new videos for you every week. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Something that can do much, that's light, that can carry on the, but if you want something that can do more,